Hello everyone. Algiers is a city that combines history, culture, and Mediterranean alert. From the UNESCO-listed Kasbah to its modern urban vibe. Today we'll be taking the ultimate Algiers tour with our guest. As we always do, I'd like to start by welcoming our guest today, Riyad Sadoun. Riyad is a tour guide here in Algiers and in several other states. Welcome, Riyad.
Thank you so much. I have the pleasure to be with you today, and I'm going to try my best to answer your questions.
Thank you for accepting our invitation. Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Yes, of course. Well, my name is Sadoun Riyad. I studied political sciences, and then I got to tourism by actually an accident. I was always a history geek. I loved history, so when I got the chance, I took it. And yeah, that's what most people should do.
I think when you mention your field of work to people here in Algeria, you hear a lot of different opinions. A lot of people don't know that this business of being a tourist guide exists here in Algeria, since we don't get that many tourists, I'd say. What would you say about that?
Well, I would say that's true, because when I represent myself as a tour guide, especially an English-speaking tour guide, most people say, well, do we have tourists in the first place? Because Algeria in the last years was not actually a famous destination like a lot of countries, but that's changing. Now we are receiving a lot of tourists, a lot of English-speaking tourists. That's why we need talents in this field, especially people that can represent the country, because as a tour guide, we are ambassadors of our own country.
Yes, of course, and when it comes to talent, I'm sure that Algeria has many brilliant young people who speak different languages. I've met a lot of university students who speak at least 3, which is quite impressive when you compare it to other countries. I think we should focus on Algiers to begin our conversation with, since you work a lot in Algiers, and I think that's where you started. Can you give us an overview of Algiers that you usually present to the tourists?
Yeah, of course. Well, as you mentioned, I work in other states, but because I am a son of Algiers, I was born in the famous Kasbah, so I can represent the city at best.
Who better to show you Algiers than Rid al-Kasbah?
Exactly. So an overview for people that don't know actually the history of Algiers. A lot of people think that the city of Algiers was built by the Ottomans, but actually it dates to the Phoenician times, because Algiers used to be called Iqosim in the Phoenician times. So we're talking about, yes. Exactly, we're talking about the 3rd and 2nd century BC. Then we have the Romans that called it Iqosium. That was the old name of Algiers. So the Romans been here, but you cannot find a lot of Roman ruins, because when they decided to build the city of Algiers in the 10th century. So the man who built this, everyone knows him and heard of him. His name is Bouloughin ibn Ziri.
Right.
He was the one who built the Kasbah, or the city of Algiers, in the first place, and that was in the 10th century. And after that, the city actually been through a lot. So we're talking about the Ottoman arriving to Algiers that made it one of the strongest and biggest cities in the Mediterranean, not in the world.
And you can see the effect that Ottoman Empire left on the style of buildings that you can see today in Algiers and in the Kasbah especially.
Yeah, of course. When we walk in the Kasbah, when people see the palaces, especially the palaces that the Ottomans left, they believe that the Ottomans actually built the Kasbah.
The city, which is wrong.
Exactly, because we have the local Arab Berbers that actually built the Kasbah in the 10th century, as mentioned. And then when the Ottomans arrived, they added from their culture to the city of Algiers and to the country in general. So we see a lot of Ottoman touch, especially in the Kasbah with the palaces. And also we see some French touch. So the Kasbah actually gathers a lot of different architecture styles and gathers a lot of history in one place. And then the modern Kasbah today is actually being renovated. So we hope in the future it's going to be one of the most attraction places for tourists, because now when they come to Algiers, they focus on the Kasbah, but we hope it's going to be better and better in the future.
And let's hope it can stay well preserved as well, because a lot of the history goes in these small details.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so can you introduce us to the history of Algiers? We all know that Algiers has a rich history. I'm sure that you usually highlight a few historical events that you know I think tourists should know about, or any periods that you think shaped the city. We've talked about the Ottoman Empire, we talked about the Romans, but I think we have a few key events, historical events, that we should introduce the tourists to.
Yeah, of course. So, as mentioned, we talked about the Phoenician and the Roman times, but actually when you talk to tourists about that, they cannot see those touches.
Right.
Exactly. So, but when we talk about the Arab touch or the Ottoman touch, they can see it in the architecture, in the palaces, in the traditions that we still own today in the country. Also, the Kasbah was one of the most important points in the country, especially when it came to the Independence War. Actually, when I talk about the Kasbah to tourists, I highlight the Ottoman times, the Arabic times, and also the struggle and the heroic acts that the people in the Kasbah had against the French. And the Kasbah played a huge role in the Independence War, especially because it was considered the Arabic side of the city. Because now in Algiers, we have the Kasbah representing the old side of the city, and then we have the center of Algiers, that's the French modern European side. So the Kasbah was always important in this part of the city.
Yeah, you usually find the security check-in points of the French colonizers there. You usually see it's the hometown of many Algerian heroes. When you read about the Algerian Revolution, even when you see any movie that's based about the Algerian Revolution, there's a scene or two in Kasbah. So I think it's important to mention that part.
Exactly. We need to focus about our heroic past, because as I mentioned, when we talk about the Roman times, they cannot see anything Roman.
Right.
When we talk about the Arabic and the Ottoman times, sometimes it gets confusing because it's a long history. But I try my best to focus on the Independence War, because actually that's what made Algeria what it is today.
Speaking of the Independence War, you told us that the tourists couldn't see any Roman touches in the area, but something that I've noticed lately when I've been to the Kasbah, I've seen a lot of murals with pictures of martyrs, of important characters that were during the Algerian War of Liberation. You could see Algerian flags everywhere, so I think you get that sense of liberation, that sense of revolution.
Exactly. What I like about the Kasbah, as you mentioned, you see all the pictures. For example, when you go to the Museum of Ali Lapointe, you see all the pictures, you see and you learn about what happened, and you see part of the house that's full in that incident, and that actually gives a meaning to what you're saying. Because when you explain the Independence War and they see pictures and they hear stories from the locals, that's the important thing, interaction with locals. And also you see the flags that actually give a meaning to the words you're giving them.
Exactly. They get that sense of revolution, that it didn't come easy.
Exactly.
Okay, so I think we should talk about activities that tourists can do, and especially cultural experiences.
Yes.
When you go to the Kasbah, for example, you can try on al-hayek that you told me about backstage, a lot of different activities. What do tourists like to do usually here in Algiers?
So we need to keep in mind that for most tourists, Algeria is a mystery.
Right.
So when they come here, they come with no expectations. So when I personally take them to the Kasbah, I try my best to give them different experiences. So we start from trying in Stah al-Bahja, we try tea, Algerian tea with sweets.
Right.
I try to give them qalbalouz, or what I can find.
It's a must.
Exactly. So walking down the Kasbah, we go by a beautiful shop that makes tiles, or zalij, as we call it.
Right.
They can learn of the technique, how to paint on it, how to make it, and also the history
behind it. Yes.
Exactly. So after that, we can, as you mentioned, we can take them to a place when they can try al-hayek, to understand how Algerian women used to dress
and
back in the day.
for men.
Exactly. We give them tarboush, barnous, anything we can find in the Kasbah so they can try. And also, every time I get the chance to interact with the local, because the Kasbah has a long history. The walls have a history, houses has a history, also people. So sometimes we stop some elder people in the streets, and they can tell us about the stories and what they learned from their parents, and I believe that's the most beautiful experience they can have in the Casbah.
And Algerians are known to be very kind, very generous when it comes to tourists, when it comes to outsiders. They usually welcome them, tell them a few stories. Even you told me that you had experiences where people were inviting these strangers, total strangers, back to their houses for a good meal, for a good Algerian traditional meal. Tell me a few stories about that.
Yeah, well, that's actually always happens because, as I mentioned earlier, that Algeria is a mystery for most people. So when they come to the country, they don't expect anything. So what I try to do is to get some interaction with the locals in the subway, in local markets, also inside houses. And always people invite the tourists to their houses, especially the tourists that speak English, because that's a new world for most Algerians.
Right.
It's a surprising thing, and it's a new thing for tourists to come. And it's also a new thing for Algerians to meet someone from a different country. So I try to focus on that. And as you mentioned, Algerians are known for us and for the Arabs mostly, that we have such hospitality in the country that we can never ignore. So I have a lot of stories when we walk, people invite us to their homes, they can buy water for us, they can buy metro tickets for us, they offer actually what they can. And actually one time I took them to a wedding in Constantine. We got invited to a traditional wedding, and it was actually a great experience for them.
It's very Algerian to invite strangers to your wedding.
Exactly. There is always extra food for people.
I mean, yeah, that's the whole point of Algerian generosity. Speaking of Algerian generosity and weddings, something that is a keynote in these occasions is the Algerian cuisine. And I'm sure everyone who visits the country would like to share or maybe try and taste a few of these dishes. What are the main dishes that you usually offer to your tourists?
Well, because we're focusing on Algiers, mostly in Algiers, every day I provide for them different kind of food. So the first day I always start with shorba, bura, kirshta, something traditional that we
basics.
have. Exactly, from Algiers. Then the second day we try the couscous, we try kebab, we try zviri if we can find it. When we go to Constantine,
Isn't that too intense for them?
Well, actually, you can order zviri that's not hot. It's not spicy.
Right,
yeah,
yes.
I always choose something light for them. When we go to Constantine, they can try, as they call it, mahjouba.
Right.
Or they can try shakshuka.
Shakshuka,
Exactly.
yes.
So that's what makes Algeria special, that every region is special with something, especially when it comes to food.
Exactly. There's a lot to see and a lot to taste here in Algeria. Speaking of things that we should see, I think we should talk about architecture here in Algeria. I mean, there's something for people who like history, who like ancient buildings, and there's also a few places that you could take someone who is interested in learning about the modern type of architecture here in Algiers. Can you talk to us about a few of the buildings that you usually visit?
Okay, so when we're talking about architectures, I try to show them all types. So we start in the Casbah with the Arabic or Ottoman architecture in the palaces, which is amazing, and you cannot find it in other place. After that, we move to the center of Algiers. That was considered the European side. In that side, you can see actually the fancy apartment buildings with decoration and balconies. You can also see some what people used to call the ghettos.
Right.
Yeah, the houses for normal people or for low class people, so they can also get a taste of that. Also, when we talk about architecture, we can never miss the Martyrs Monument.
Of course.
It's one of the most famous and important monuments in the country, and it represents a lot lot of things, and its
it
style
has
and
historical
shape.
significance, so yeah.
Exactly. Also, we go to the Great Mosque, which
Right.
is Algeria's diamond in the modern day. We visit the mosque, we try to visit churches to give them an idea about how other religions are living in the
Right,
country.
and the diversity that's
Exactly.
here in
So
Algeria, right?
with architecture, so everything has a story and everything has a meaning. So we try to connect architecture with the backstory every place we go.
Thank you for that amazing answer and for all the great work that you're doing. Now, I would like to ask Riyad about hidden gems here in Algiers that maybe even us locals don't know about, that he usually takes tourists to see.
When we talk about hidden gems, as I mentioned earlier, the Great Mosque.
Right.
Actually, on the
It's
other
not
side,
very hidden. I mean, it's huge.
no, but on the other side of the mosque,
Right.
there is the Arab Garden that most people actually drive by, but they don't know what that is.
Yes.
So when you go to the Arab Garden, you can get a view of the mosque, a view of the sea, and also there is replicas of the most famous monuments from every Arabic country.
Right, that's fairly new.
It is new. It was actually made during the Arab Summit.
All right.
So they made the monuments. For me, it's a great experience to have in Algiers. The second hidden gem for me is the library in the Casbah. So the library actually is located behind the Kachawa Mosque. It's a small library.
I actually know about this one, but I think you guys don't know about it, so you should listen closely.
Yeah, so for people who loves to read, that's a really beautiful library. It's like a small palace with tiles and decorations. The second good thing about it is actually they have a lot of events. The last one they had was the Arabic calligraphy, so you can learn how to write the Arabic calligraphy. So for me, that's actually something you should try.
So you can enjoy books and activities.
Exactly. It's a cultural environment in that place. The other thing you want to try are traditional food in the Casbah, but not in restaurants, but inside houses. There is a lot of houses and families that actually provides and offers meals, lunch or dinner for tourists and Algerians. So if you want to have actually the best food and a great experience, you should try one of those restaurants.
I think we've got a pretty good idea about these gems. We wouldn't tell you more, so we wouldn't ruin our favorite places. Okay, so yeah, I think we've covered mostly everything when it comes to these kind of experiences, but we didn't talk about traditions or customs that I'm sure every tourist would like to know about. What are a few customs that you usually tell the tourists about?
Well, actually, when it comes to traditions, even though most tourists stay in the north, we're talking about Algiers, Constantine, Oran, these states, I always try to talk about culture and explain the differences between every region. So we talk about the east, represented in Annaba, Tbissa, Constantine, those states. We talk about the west, that actually has a whole different culture. When it comes to the center, Algiers, it's when most cultures meet. So we have the eastern, western, even the southern.
Right.
When it gets to the south, we explain that Algeria has the biggest desert. We have a lot of, as we call them, Tuareg tribes live in south. So during the tour, we try as guides to actually put the light on most of the cultures, even though they're not going to see them, but at least to have a taste, an explanation, an idea about what Algeria has.
Exactly, especially that it's a very diverse country and we all live in peace together, but it's good to show the beautiful diversity here in Algeria. But there's also an issue that gets brought up a lot when I talk to people who want to visit Algeria, foreigners that is. They always ask me about safety or safety tips. I'm sure you're a professional, you have been asked this question a few times. What do you usually say when they ask you for security or, you know, just to be safe, how to be safe in Algiers?
So the first thing I do personally, and we do as guides, is to contact clients or travelers or tourists before they arrive to Algeria,
Right.
to give them tips to follow in the country. And I believe that one of the most important things that we should focus on to promote our country is safety, because most of those tourists know really little about the world, and especially about Algeria. And the only image they have is about the Black Decade that was happening in the country, and they still think that Algeria is the same way.
Yeah, it's not very safe, and especially that it's not quite the tourist destination. It wasn't very open to tourists until recently.
Exactly. So for most tourists that I received, they always say that when they tell their friends and families they're coming to Algeria, they say why? Because they still think that Algeria is not dangerous but suspicious.
Right.
So as guides, as locals, especially now we have social media. So all the kids, all the talented people needs to promote the safety of the country, especially the hospitality of the people. And I think that's the first step we should take before promoting the nature we have and the beaches.
It's a privilege, actually, yes.
Exactly, because if we promote beaches and hotels and mountains, those are all over the world. But you need to promote what makes your country special. Now we have the history, we have the independence war, we have the diversity, we have the culture, and we should focus always on safety in the first place.
That's a very good tip for everyone watching us today and is a content creator. I think you should focus on what Riyad said. It's very important. Riyad, we've talked about cuisine, we've talked about architecture, history. What's your favorite aspect about Algiers?
Well, my favorite aspect about Algiers is I only know Algiers. Even if I travel, I've been to France or Spain, I've been to most of the states. If I spend more than 48 hours, I feel homesick, as they call it. I always want to come back to Algiers because my family comes from here. I was born here. I spent all of my life here, and I understand the people. Because when I mentioned the diversity in cultures, I feel that Algiers is the best place to me to live in this country.
It really is, yes. We love our city. Yeah. One last thing that I wanted to mention is a lot of tourists think that Algerians only speak Arabic or French, so they would think that they would have a problem speaking English here or even communicating in English here. Now, as a tour guide, you speak perfect English, and you organize as well small groups for people to practice their English. Can you tell us about that?
So for the first point, that people think that Algerians only speak Arabic and French, that's true, because if we talk about the older generation, we're talking about 45 years plus. Most of them actually got French education.
Right.
So they only know French and Arabic. But for the younger generation, like myself, I speak English. I have friends that speak Russian, Chinese, German. So the younger generation actually is more open to the world like the elders used to be. To explain that to tourists, I start by mentioning that the Algerian dialect is special because it has Arabic, French, and Berber in the same sentence.
And some Spanish, even some Spanish.
Exactly.
Right.
So the second thing I focus is to explain the differences between every region. So the West is not like the East, not like the center. And then I explain why most Algerians speak French, and that comes back to history. So that's actually give them an idea what happened in the country and what caused that most Algerians speak French. But as mentioned with the younger generation, they speak a lot of different languages.
Exactly. Can you tell us about the English groups that you usually organize?
Yes. So I started a new thing on Instagram that I actually give the chance for Algerians, either if they study English as a profession or they want to learn or practice, because one thing that's gonna be a barrier to you to learn a language is if you are shy.
Right.
And if you only speak language in your comfort zone inside the class. So you should always try to use that language with strangers, around strangers, because the weird looks and people staring at you are gonna give you confidence. So now I take Algerians, young, old, it doesn't matter, people who wants to practice their English to make it to the Kasbah. We have the walk in the Kasbah, I give the walk in English, and they have the chance to listen and to speak in English.
Right.
And always gives them the confidence to use English around strangers.
Quite a confidence boost. Thank you. It's a very great idea. So I think we have come to the end of today's episode. However, as I usually do, I like to ask our guests for a piece of advice for the youth watching us who want to follow in their footsteps. For example, for your case, people who want to become tour guides here in Algeria, especially those who speak multiple languages and would like to start using them with tourists.
So I got that advice from one of my colleagues, and I always follow this advice. It says that before learning the history and before promoting how your country is big and beautiful, you need to work on yourself, because as a tour guide, you are the first and the only ambassador working with the tourist. So you represent your family, yourself, and the country. So before you read the history books and you get the history from the streets and the palaces and everything, work on yourself, work on your language skills, and get not the historical education but the cultural education, because as I mentioned, you represent your country, so you're the ambassador of Algeria with the tourists.
You are the image of Algeria.
Exactly.
That's a very good piece of advice. Thank you, Riyad. Any last words?
I would like to thank you, and I would really encourage especially the younger generation to do what you do, to give the chance for English speakers. Spanish is gonna develop with time. but I want to encourage everyone to use their skills in what they can.
Thank you so much, Ria. Thank you for accepting our invitation and being our guest today and introducing us to Algiers from a new point of view. Thank you everyone for watching. See you in another episode.